For this video, we will be collaging and masking videos together into one in Photoshop. In this case, to have multiple windows that could be projected into one scene. So here I am in Bridge, which is the standard Adobe file browser, which offers some really helpful shortcuts like the one I'm about to show you. I'm going to select, using Shift, both of the video files that I wanted to pick. If I wanted to pick files that weren't right next to each other, I could hold the Command or Control key on Windows and select, the first and last and leave the middle one unselected. I can't show you that here because I only have 2 videos. Having selected all the videos that I want to use in my Photoshop document, I go to the Tools menu, the Photoshop sub-menu, and then I choose Load Files into Photoshop Layers. Now this is not the only way to do it, but I do think this is the best way to get your layers into Photoshop. So here it says Photoshop 2020 is busy. Whenever it says that and it asks you to queue, just say yes, and it's usually bluffing, as you can see. It just did it. Now, with both these videos, I know that while I might want to rotate them and tweak them a little more, I want to get them vertical to start. Now, I don't want to make the whole document vertical because our ultimate video output should be a horizontal video, so it's conforming to a standard format. So I do not want to go to image rotation. That will rotate my entire canvas. I do want to rotate both of them the same way, so I will highlight both layers here in the layer palette by using the Shift key to select both. Now you see in the timeline that it's also selected both, but for the time being we're going to pretty much just be aware that the timeline is there, but otherwise ignore it because we're not going to do any sort of time code editing on the videos just yet. We just want to transform them. So I've got the layers selected, and now I will go to Edit, not Image, but Edit, Transform, Rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. Of course, if my videos were rotated the other way, we wouldn't go counterclockwise. So it says it requires converting them into a smart object, which is fine. So now, if you look carefully, you'll see that the little corner of these icons have changed to the smart object icon instead of a video icon. Doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to go ahead and name these Window 1, and I could call this one Window 2, but I'm actually going to call it Split Window because I'm going to split this window. Now, this checkerboard pattern is Adobe language for the empty void of space. Black would just be black, which is a value. White would be white, which is a value. I don't want an empty void here. I don't want to look at it, and I don't want it in my final output either. So down here at the bottom of your layers palette, there's an icon that looks like a black and white cookie. I click on that and I have a list of adjustment layers, and I'm going to choose solid color, and then I'm just going to go all the way to white with that. And I know for sure it's white because R, G, and B are all 255, but if it's not perfect white, it doesn't matter that much for the purpose of this. I should say as a side note, if your intention with this piece is to project windows onto a wall or something like that, you probably want a black background so that you're not projecting anything there, unless you want to expose the texture of the wall and the projector is the only light source. But this is getting way too specific. We don't need to worry about that right now. Now I'm going to split this window that I've called Split Window, which means that I'm going to want it to appear twice. So I am simply going to right-click on that layer. If you don't have right-click enabled on your Mac, you can press Control and click, not Command, Control. And I'm going to choose this option, Duplicate Layer, and I'm just going to call it Split Window 2. So I know which is which. In fact, I'm even going to get more specific here and rename these right and left, so I even remember which one I mean to split. You know, I used to never name any of my layers, and I've realized over time it really helps if you work on a complicated file and you need to go back to it later. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now, if I take a quick peek at my image size, I can see that this is standard 4K resolution, which is great. I don't really want to go beyond that because that's going to mean that it's going to need specialized websites, projectors, whatever. Like I'd like to keep it within this standard, so I'm just going to leave it at that and cancel. If you shot your videos in HD, 1080p, I'm going to open image size again. You might want to write these numbers down because this is kind of the maximum resolution canvas you should work on, which here is 3840, 2160. If you want to just stick with the canvas size you started with and not sweat these details, that's fine. You can do that. It's not a crucial step. Okay, so here I'm going to start masking. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I'm just selected on this window. I'm even going to take the little eyes here and turn them off to just hide those others. And I will, in my tools, select the, I think this is called the Move tool. Yeah, the Move tool. I just think of it as the powerful pointer. And I'm going to move this layer around. Now I'm going to resize the layer. If you're using a newer version of Photoshop, resizing the layer will keep it proportional. If you're using an older version, you'll have to press Shift, otherwise it'll get all wonky like this. Another nice trick to know is if you press Option or Shift and Option on an older version of Photoshop, it will resize to the middle instead of the edge, which can be helpful. So I'm going to resize this video to about here, and that looks good to me, and I will just press Enter or Return. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is show my rulers. So I'm going to go to View, Rulers, and I just get those rulers at the top. And the only reason I did that is, especially when you're using the Move tool, but I think with any tool, you can click inside the ruler and hold and drag out what's called a guide. And that shows me that this window is way off at the bottom. I'm going to pull another guide, and I can see that it is pretty much right at the top. So knowing that, I know that I need to do a basic transformation to fix this image, which is called Skew. And you'll probably need to do something like this if you're trying to arrange windows on a canvas. So I'll zoom out a little bit, in this case using Command-. And now with the Edit option selected on the layer I'm working on, I'm going to go to Transform and Skew. Now if I can't see the bottom of what I'm working on, I'll just zoom out a little more. And now I can click on this box and just pull it down a little bit. And it looks like this line is dipping down a little bit down here now, so I'll just compensate by moving this a little bit up here. And that looks really good, or good enough for now, at least. You can also pull in the middle to even out things a little more. Now the shape of our video here is a little altered, but that's okay because the next step we're going to do is to mask it. So I pressed Enter to enable that transformation. And now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to do some selections on this. So for this window down here, it's actually a rectangular window, so I'm just going to do a rectangular selection. I'm trying to decide how much of it I want. I'm going to go minimal here. See, I can transform it a little more there, but that's fine. I can come back to that. So for this window up here, I want to actually get this curve. So I'm going to use the Polygon Lasso tool here. I'm going to hold Shift so it's adding to my selection. And I'm just going to make as detailed a selection as I can. So there are much more advanced select tools which might work for you well in this case, like the magnetic lasso tool could be good. If you're good at using the pen tool, especially if you have experience with a program like Illustrator, that would be the best tool for this. I could also take a circular selection and subtract from it. I'm using this Polygon Lasso tool right now specifically because I want to go with the fastest method here. And if you don't have a lot of experience with selections, I would also suggest you go with that method. So here I can go in the select menu to this option select and mask. And I can see that even though I cut this out with harsh edges, it still looks pretty good. But to smooth those lines out into a curve, I can just use this smoothness slider and crank that up. And now we've got some nice, or at least nice enough for now, smooth edges. And now I will click OK, and our selections are refined. So on this same layer, I'm now at the bottom of the layer palette. There's this little icon, a rectangle with a circular dot. Looks like the Bangladeshi flag or the Japanese flag. I will click on that and that will create a layer mask. The layer mask is an image, so I can edit it more when I come back. But this should be fine for now. Now, if I want to tweak my transformation a little more, which I do to fit this layer mask, looking at this layer here, there's a chain link in between the layer and the mask. I'm going to unclick the chain link, which means that I can edit the mask or the image and not them, both of them together. Zooming out again, I will go to edit and skew again, and I will pull it out just a tiny bit here. I went out a tiny bit to the right just to get this side of the window a little bit straighter. So there we go. That one is complete. So looking at this window for which I want the right, I can see right away that there's a few transformations I'm going to want to do to both of these layers. So I'm going to show both the right and left, and using the Shift key, I'm going to select both of them, and then I'm going to shrink them both and move them so that they fit well into the frame. I can also see using these same guides that I set up earlier that this also needs to be tweaked a little bit. So I'll press enter here. And then I'm just going to open up Workspace a little bit. I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Skew. And keep in mind, I'm still working on both layers at the same time. For those of you who use Photoshop, you might be wondering, could I just do these adjustments on one layer and then duplicate it? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, you could do it that way. And had I known this one needed adjustments, I probably would have done it that way too, though it doesn't matter so much which order in that case. So there we go. I'm going to keep the selections really simple for these two layers. I'm just going to use the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to zoom back in and I'm going to select this layer. Just like that, and hit mask. Now, while I am being pretty loose with how precise my selection is here for the sake of speed, I do want my selections for these two halves of the window to be identical. So the way I'm going to achieve that is I'm actually going to hold the Command key, or Control if I used Windows, and when I click on this mask, it turns it back into a selection. I'm then going to click on the layer marked left window and move that selection. Now you may notice I have my right and left totally backwards here, and yeah, that's just me making mistakes, so I'll have to rename those in a moment. So using the select tool, not the move tool, I can move this selection. I'm going to hold down the Shift key so that it only, I'm going to hold down the Shift key after it starts moving so that it only moves horizontally. And then I'll frame this window, and then I will mask that. And because I can't tell left and right apart, I'm now going to have to correct that. So I'll rename this one as right, and rename this one as left. Okay, so now I can reveal all my layers, and I will take the right window and using the move tool, and they are locked to each other here, which is a good thing. I'll come back to that. I will slide this out to the side. Now I am going to hold shift after I start sliding it so that it moves out evenly, and I'm going to put it right there. I'll go to the left one. You know what, I'm actually going to put these out more to the side. Left, right. There's various things you can do with guides to make this more precise. I'm not going to worry about that now. Now this middle layer, I unlocked the mask and the image for editing purposes. If I leave them unlocked, it's going to be bad news. This is what's going to happen if I try to move my image around. It moves around inside the mask. That's no good. So I turn the lock back on, and now the layer is moving on its own again. And I'm going to go ahead and, well, if I can, I'm going to go ahead and enlarge, whoops, this one a little bit so it's a better fit for the others. That looks pretty good. Now you'll notice I'm moving the layer and it seems to kind of like jolt a little bit. That's because the function snap is on. I'm going to turn that off, and now I can just move it with a little more nuance. Snap might help me in some cases, but right now I just want to eyeball it. Now another cool thing with the move tool is if I hover over these guides, the icon changes into sort of these up and down arrows, and I can drag the guides back into the rulers, which is the way you delete guides in Photoshop, which is weird, but that's how it works. So I've got my layout, and this looks great. I can change the color of the background to anything I want. I'm just going to stick with the white background here. I think that looks fine. I can sort of preview this in the timeline palette here. I say sort of because the preview function in Photoshop is quite primitive. So here I'll hit play. And you can see the frames are jittering around a little bit, but it's not great. That's fine, because we can preview this in another video editor afterwards. So what I do want to do is make sure that my clips aren't dramatically different lengths. So I'm going to move the timeline all the way to 20 seconds. And that's where I come in and start yakking. So I'm going to move that back. Let me try 20 seconds. You can see the preview function, as I said, is quite clunky. So I'll go to 18 seconds. And now I'm going to trim this clip. I'm going to click at the beginning of it and slide it until I get to the point where I was playing from, and then I'm going to take the whole thing and lock it back at the beginning so that these start here. Now I'll check out what's going on at the end. That looks fine. My other two clips are perfectly the same length, not because I'm good at timing my clips, but because it's the same clip copied and pasted. You know, it's the layer duplicated, so they should be the same time. So trimming from the end of the top clip of the middle window, I'm now trimming that down so it's the same length. Now, if you're using, if you have access to other really basic video editors, just like QuickTime or whatever, and you want to trim your clips to the same length before you get started, that's totally fine. This color fill layer doesn't have any animation going on it, but you can see that when it's not there, it just disappears. We have that empty grid here again. So this one, I'm going to use the same trim function and just stretch it out. Now, it's really important, just going to say it one more time, my timeline editing after I've done this masking, because you can accidentally make this part of the timeline itself, in which case your masking will sort of animate and change. And that could be really cool, but that's a whole nother layer of complication that we don't need right now. Everything looks pretty good. I am just going to throw one more layer on top of this whole thing, a curve layer in this case, and I'm going to tweak the contrast on the whole image. Now, a really cool thing about working in Photoshop is you can do selective adjustments very easily. So I can actually create another curve layer, or I'm going to undo that. I can make a selection, so I'm just going to select this top window, and because it's just white around it, I don't need to be so precise with my selection. And I will create a additional curve. And with that one, I'm just going to brighten the window itself. So there's a lot of things I can tweak here, which is really nice. Now, if your palettes and things are getting in the way and you can't see what's going on, you can always hit tab so you can just see the whole composition at the same time. Once you've completed checking everything on your timeline, you can simply go to the File menu, choose the option Export, Render Video, and this dialog will come up. As I mentioned in the other demo specifically for this class, when you render your video, you should use H.264 as your format, and you should bring the resolution down to HD, and you just hit render. I'm not going to replace that file. You hit render, and the video will begin to export. So this will take a while, depending on how powerful your computer is. So at this point, you want to just leave your computer, go have a coffee or whatever, and when you come back, it will be finished. It's kind of one of those watched pot never boils situations. So I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing your work.